Hi, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach Podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Concussion Coach Podcast. Before I introduce my guest today, I just wanted to make sure you all know about the free guide that is available on my website. It's the 5 best ways to support your loved one dealing with a concussion. If you have a friend or family member who is struggling with post-concussion symptoms, or if you're the one struggling and would like your loved ones to know more about what you're going through and how they can help, head over to my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com, and download the free guide. I am really excited for this interview today. My guest is Andy Ellison. Andy is married to his high school sweetheart, and they have 2 adult daughters that are amazing young ladies. He's a Colorado native and graduated from University of Colorado, Boulder, with a degree in economics and Spanish. He got his MBA from Thunderbird School of Global Management and graduated with honors. He went straight into commercial banking and eventually was one of 2 founders of Mountain View Bank of Commerce in Westminster, Colorado. He was CEO of the bank for 16 years before the bank was sold. Andy is now the CFO of Boone Heart Institute, where he's helping to achieve the mission of eradicating heart disease and stroke. He's a bad golfer, but enjoys it anyway. So I didn't write that. He wrote that, just so you know. Thank you for being here today, Andy. I'm so grateful that you're willing to come and share your experience with brain injury. I know it's not always an easy thing to open up about these things, but I really believe that hearing other stories can have a really positive impact on people. So thank you very much for your willingness to share yours, and thank you for being here today.
Of course. Thank you, Bethany. Thanks for your emails and your podcasts. They have brought me a lot of hope, and I'm sure they have done the same for others. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's jump in here. I know this is pretty broad, but why don't you just tell us about your story? How long ago was it? What happened? Just kind of background info, and then we'll dive into the other things.
Yeah, sounds good. And if I get too far off task here, you bring me right back to task, Bethany. But in January of 2021, I had COVID and was struggling a little bit to recover. I had a couple of months of real fatigue. And then in April of 2021, I hit my head, just walked into a door frame. I was closing up the house at night and it was dark and just walked into a door frame. It was a Friday evening, so that weekend I kind of fumbled around a little bit and had, what would you expect as typical concussion symptoms. And then, Monday I went into work and I was the first one in as usual and started hammering away on my emails. And about 10 minutes in, I started feeling really sick. And by about the 15th minute, I couldn't continue. So I went into a little conference room in our office, and it was an inside conference room that didn't have any outside windows. And so I could turn off the lights and shut the door and laid my head down for a while. And, after half an hour or so, I was back to normal. So I went back at it thinking, whew, that was weird. Hope that doesn't happen again. And went back in, and it was 10 minutes later, I was in the same spot. So after about the second or third iteration of that, my HR person comes in and sees me in the little conference room with my head down and says, hey man, you all right? I'm like, I don't know. And so I struggled through that week. I'd had concussions before that I recovered from really quickly, but I was not recovering from this one. So I went to the doctor a week or so later and told him what was going on. And she said, yeah, wait here for a minute. She came back and said, hey, and sweating. I don't know why I was sweating, but I was sweating. It was one of the symptoms that I had. And she came back. She said, hey, I've got you, and you need to go get a CT scan. And I've got you an appointment this afternoon at 3:30. And I said, okay. And I just thought it was normal protocol. So she said, do you need an ambulance to take you over there? And I'm like, no, I can drive. I drove here. Like, why would I need an ambulance? And so I drove over, and it was 1:30, at that time. So I had to go straight over to the CT place. And afterwards, we were having dinner. It was that evening, 5:30 or 6, and I got a call and she said, "Hey, we got your results back. There was an abnormality there, and I need you to go get an MRI." And I said, "Okay, tell me more about the abnormality." And she says, "Well, go get your MRI and then we'll talk about it." I said, "Okay, so, who do you want me to call to get an MRI?" She said, "Oh, you're all set up for tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Oh, wow.
He said, "Now I'm scared, doc. Tell me what's going on." She said, "Well, we found an abnormality. Go get an MRI. We'll talk about it afterwards." So, pretty sleepless night. Went to go get my MRI the next morning, and they called me midday the next day and said, "Hey, you have a brain tumor, Andy. You need to find a neurologist at your earliest convenience and figure it out." And after the word brain tumor, sort of it was hard to follow anything else they were talking about, right? I thought I just had a concussion, right? I thought, I didn't know what was that was an unexpected result and an incidental finding. So, it took a couple of weeks to find a neurologist and get an appointment and get in. They're pretty busy people. Um, and so went to go see a neurologist and they said, "Hey, look, you have a tumor in your left ventricle." And I'm like, "Wait, I thought it was in my brain, not my heart. I didn't know that I had a ventricle in my in my brain." And it's what pumps the spinal fluid through your body. And so my wife was with me on that appointment, and he's explaining to her that if the tumor occludes or blocks the ventricle, that I'd probably be unconscious, and she'd have to get me to an emergency room immediately, or I'd have 24 to 48 hours before I die. And my wife and I are looking at each other like, What are we even talking about? Like, how do we get here, right?" So they wanted to monitor it and make sure it didn't grow because it wasn't easy to get to. You can't It was a couple inches from the top or from the side, through the nose, through the throat. You can't get there without going through some gray matter. So they didn't want to, try surgery unless it was necessary. So anyway, I was on the frequent flyer program at the MRI place for a while, every 90 days and then every 6 months. And I actually went to Cognitive FX, where you and I met, Bethany, in 2023. So 2 years later, May of 2023.
Mm.
And they did the functional MRI, and it was that MRI that actually revealed that the tumor had started to grow. It was pretty stable for a couple of years, but it had started to grow. So
Mm.
that's when we kicked off the search for what to do next. And I had a neurosurgeon here in Colorado that I really liked, and his suggestion was radiology. They wanted to shoot like 12 different rays of radiology from different points in my head, and no one ray would do damage to the gray matter in between, but where they meet, like Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams, right? So all the streams would cross, all 12 streams would cross at the tumor and hopefully, shrink the tumor. I thought, well, that sounds great. It's non-invasive. Let's do that. But I had a good friend, a guy I worked with that happened to know another neurosurgeon. He said, "Andy, just get a second opinion, right? Before you go in and do the radiation, get a second opinion." And so I did. I was very, very grateful that he set me up and talked with the second opinion. And he had the exact opposite opinion. He said, "No, we should go in and take it out. I would not do radiation. I would absolutely not recommend radiation. I would
Mm.
take it out." So, we talked about it. My wife and I talked about it at length and decided we'd do the only reasonable thing, and that was get a third opinion and have a tiebreaker, right? Whatever the third doctor said would be what we'd do, right? And so we did our research and we found a neurosurgeon at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, who was one of the best ranked in the country, and got an appointment to go see him fairly quickly. And he said, "I think we should do surgery. I think we should take it out. I absolutely don't think radiation is the right thing. We need to remove it."
Mm.
So we said, "Okay, when do you recommend we do that?" He said, "I have an opening in 2 weeks." So we
Wow.
we went home and came back 2 weeks later and had the surgery done. So anyway, you asked a very short question. That was a very long answer, but kind of what we
No,
wanted to hear.
yeah, no, that's a lot. Okay, so I'm curious. I didn't realize that you knew about the brain tumor before you went to CFX. That's new information to me. So, do you think that, well, okay, few questions. How long was it between when you had COVID and when you hit your head?
About 3 months.
3 months? Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and do you or they think that and by they, I mean doctors, that hitting the head was related to the tumor? Like, were you not aware of where you were spatially or things like that, or was it just random? Or do we know?
I think the tumor and the hitting my head were unrelated. I don't know. Nobody really knows with the COVID, the concussion, and the tumor.
Mhm.
You look up the symptoms and they're all pretty much the same, right? So it's pretty much anybody's guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it was unrelated. The tumor finding was incidental. They called it incidental. They were doing a search for concussion issues and they found the tumor incidentally.
Wow. And because you hadn't had any of like you didn't have symptoms that were from the tumor specifically that you were aware of until like, because the thing that would have been problematic was if it blocked the cerebrospinal fluid from flowing, right? So
Yep.
that interesting. Okay. So interesting because it was growing in that space there. So did you, let's go back further then. Okay. So you found out about the tumor, you were just kind of waiting on it. And then it was in that time period that you decided you must have still been dealing with concussion symptoms at that point because you decided to go to cognitive FX. Is that right?
Yeah. We monitored the symptoms pretty closely because we really wanted to understand if they were related to the concussion, to long COVID, or to the tumor, right? We really wanted to separate those out. And
Mhm.
what we decided was that if the symptoms were getting better, if I was improving, then it was probably not the tumor, right? It was probably the concussion. And so my symptoms did get better over those couple of years. So, we all decided that it probably wasn't the tumor that was causing the majority of the issues.
Oh,
It was concussion symptoms. So, for a lot of your listeners, I can relate to where they are and what they're going through, right?
yeah. So you did find some improvements and then you decided to go to, was it when you decided that it was concussion, is that when you decided to go to CFX?
Yeah, I wanted to, really try to knock the symptoms out entirely, right? And I thought, okay, an immersive program at a place like CFX would be one way to try to figure it out, right? To see if we can make it go away, right? Expedite that recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were the symptoms that you decided were connected to the concussion? And I think concussion and the long COVID, if you were having long COVID symptoms, those are very, very similar a lot of times. So it is really hard to tease those two apart, I would imagine. But what were some of those symptoms that you were dealing with?
Yeah, so between the time that I hit my head and the time that I went to CFX, and especially right after I hit my head, I had just an inability to look at screens. I couldn't, even if they weren't moving, if it was just email, I couldn't spend more than about 15 minutes on a screen. And as the CEO of a bank, that was problematic, right? I get several hundred emails a day. And I
Yeah.
actually I actually hired my daughter to read my emails to me. So I cleared it through our HR department that I could, have her sign a non-disclosure and she could read my emails to me.
It's brilliant, actually. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're problematic. What else?
Yeah. I was having, some headaches, nothing terrible, but certainly some ongoing headaches, some neck pain, a lot of fatigue, really a lot of fatigue. I had a ton of light and noise sensitivity. My kids would drop something and you'd have to peel me off the ceiling, right? I just was really problematic. And I still have some noise sensitivity, but I've recovered a lot from both of those.
Mm. Hallelujah. Um, okay, so what did you know, how much did you know about concussions prior to this experience, and what surprised you about your experience of having a concussion?
Yeah, I coached my daughter's soccer team, and so I had to go through like a concussion protocol training, so I could know when I could put the kids back in and when I couldn't. And so, and I'd had a couple of concussions before. One when I was very young, and another one just a few years before. It was about 2018. So, I had a little bit of knowledge, but not much, right? My first couple of concussions, I recovered from very quickly. I felt like Patrick Mahomes or another football player, right? They get a concussion, the next week they're back in the game, right? Like nothing happened.
Mhm.
That's the way it went for me. I had a concussion, and a week later I was fine, but not this time, right? It changed. And your second question about surprise, I think maybe the biggest surprise for me was just how long the symptoms have lasted. I'm a little over 4 years out from the concussion now, 2 years out from the surgery, a little over 2 years out from the surgery. And I still have lingering symptoms, right, that are, not great.
Yeah. But you did say that some things did improve a little bit. So um, how did things improve? What did you notice? What things did you try that were helpful?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything really has improved. I can now do emails without problem for several hours at a time, right? A couple hours in, I start to get, but a little 15-minute break from emails, just talking to people or walking around or whatever, and I can be right back at it. So my stamina for looking at screens has gotten much better. I still can't watch TV or, I have you minimized in the corner of my screen now, and I'm not watching the video because watching videos makes me a little queasy still. So I'm looking at the camera, but not at you, right? So it's one of my hacks, right? I have a lot of Zoom calls at work, and I do the same thing. I try to be engaged and active, but I'm not looking at the video. I'm all on audio.
Mm. And
Um,
it is a good hack. You can't tell it all. If people were
Thank
watching
you.
this, they would be totally convinced that you're very engaged here, visually as well.
Yeah.
Uh, so what, yeah, what were the things, what things did you try? What did you do any therapy? I mean, obviously you went to CFX. I'd love to hear about that, but did you try other things in addition to that?
Yeah, the one thing that I really took from CFX, well, first of all, it was a really neat program. The folks there are incredibly thoughtful and caring, and they understand concussions better than anybody I've ever met. And they were also ruthless in that, you'd be doing something and they would sort of go, "Great, you did that really well. We're going to add this in now," right? So they would always push you to your point of discomfort, right? You could never actually be good at something because they would find a way to make it harder, right?
Which is challenging sometimes. You got smart people like you coming through and challenges us to challenge you. That was fun.
It's yeah, it was definitely a little bit of a game. So that was great. But the one thing that I've taken away from CFX that I still do pretty regularly is the Brainwaves app. Um, I think I paid $5 for it or something one time. It's not a monthly fee, but I think they call it binaural beats. You have to have earbuds in, and it plays some sounds that, for whatever reason, are incredibly relaxing to me. So if I'm having some symptoms, I'll go plug in for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever is appropriate. And very often when I come out of that, I feel much, much better.
Fantastic. Yes, that's one of the best things that I've yeah, that I love to share with people and that I got from CFX as well was this app that is so helpful. And we can link to that in the show notes. But yes, that binaural beats can make a really big difference. Awesome.
There's
Any other things that you had tried that were helpful along the way?
a lot of the therapies at CFX were really helpful, like to sort of combat the noise issues that I was having, sort of the sensitivity with noise. I'd have my wife, so I'd close my eyes and sit down and she would snap, in front of me or behind me or on my right or on my left. And I would try to point to wherever I was hearing the sound. And when I started out, I was terrible. She'd snap over here and I'd point over there, right? I mean, I wasn't close. I slowly got dialed in so that I was a little better to, where it was. Had a little trouble with front and back. If it was on the right side, I'd point to the right side, but I might not get front or back. But anyway, that's a really good, if you have noise sensitivity, sound sensitivity, that was a really good treatment for me. It really helped.
Awesome. Thank you. Because that is something that a lot of people deal with. It's a hard one. I I would love to hear, and I know this is like, what was helpful for you? Well, actually, before we go to that question, I would love to talk about the challenge of knowing who to tell about your brain injury and when and how to tell them. Because I know that there are a lot of people in jobs that require a lot of cognitive effort and they're afraid of letting their work know that their brain is struggling. Um, and I know, you're a prime example of that. So what advice would you have for them? How did you handle it? Or just let's speak to that for a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Bethany. It's a great question. And it was a really difficult thought process for me, right? Who to tell and when. When I first got the diagnosis of a brain tumor, there were only two people at work that I told. One was a good friend of mine that helped me start the bank. And he was, unbelievably helpful and thoughtful and, was a true friend. And the other one was the chairman of the board. And I didn't want to, hide my brain tumor from my boss. And so I told him and I said, "Hey, I'm not ready to talk about this publicly. I'm not ready to advertise this. But, I have this brain tumor and I've started to redo my will and think about, am I going to survive this, right? And so, if you need to fire me or you need to let me go, I can't work, the 60 to 80 hours that I was working for. I can't do it. I just don't have it in me. I get sick, right? I physically can't do it. And so if you need to let me go, I totally understand and I appreciate that. All I ask is that you please give me a little time, and he stopped me, he interrupted me, and he said, he's a really good man. He interrupted me. He said, Andy, what are you talking about, man? Nobody's losing their job here. Whatever you need, just tell us what you need, and that's what we'll give you. And I'm like, holy, wow. I'm so grateful to him for that response. I mean, just an incredibly thoughtful response because he could have gone a lot of different ways with that. He had every right to, ask me to leave, right? Because I couldn't do the job the way I used to do the job.
Yeah.
So, that experience was really helpful for me. He truly understood and was helpful and thoughtful. And that's been my experience more often than not. When I finally decide to tell somebody, they're usually very understanding and thoughtful. So, I don't know that I have any sound advice on if X, then Y. If this, then you should tell them. But
Mhm.
my experience has been that, people are really understanding if you give them the chance to be. It was a little harder for the brain tumor because, I tell people I had a brain tumor and, I had to settle them down, right? I had to, oh my God, I had to sort of like talk them off. It's gonna be okay, right? Like okay.
That actually brings up a really, really interesting point. Like I wonder because people always we talk a lot about how concussion is an invisible injury. People can't see that you don't have a broken arm, you can't see a cast, they don't know that you're struggling. And I guess with a brain tumor, you also can't see that. But you do have physical evidence more so than usually people can get with a concussion. There's not well established universal acknowledgement of certain scans that will show that you have there's things that are coming out that people are trying to prove it, but a brain tumor you can show, and it's like very specific. I almost wonder if people would respond differently to, I imagine they would, like you respond differently to hearing, oh, I have a brain tumor versus, oh, I have a concussion, because I think the severity of those things, just what people understand the severity to be, is very, very different too. So that's super interesting.
Yeah. For the first couple of years, I told most everybody, I agonized early on who to tell, right? So I told my wife first thing, and so she was in the know early on, and she's been amazing. Um, but I struggled with whether or not to tell my daughters, right? They were teenagers, and I didn't, I struggled with when and how to tell them. And my mom, I dreaded having to tell my mom and dad. My dad's since passed, but um, so my wife and I talked about it a lot, and I decided to wait until I saw the neurosurgeon and I knew more, right? I didn't want to tell people I have a brain tumor. I don't know if I'm going to live or die. I don't know if I got a day or 10 years. I don't know any of that, right? Um, so we decided to wait to tell my mom and my kids until after we'd seen the neurosurgeon and we had more info. Um, but I told everybody else, like at work and friends, that it was a concussion, and that was true, right? I wasn't lying, but I wasn't ready to share the full truth. Um, so I
And
told
did people, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I just told people I had a concussion and these were the symptoms I was experiencing. And way more often than not, people were incredibly thoughtful and gracious in that process.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask about how people responded to the fact that you had a concussion specifically, like when you told them that. Um, yeah, that's so interesting. And thank you for sharing that. And I love the point that you made about
Yeah.
how people have been very mostly generous and kind when you give them the chance to be. So that's really beautiful. I think people a lot of times um it's easier for people to have compassion and patience and understanding if they are given, like you said, given the chance, if they have the knowledge. Like a little bit of understanding can go a long way in helping people feel more prone to giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Whereas if someone all of a sudden is just acting weird or different and or in a way that people aren't used to or don't like, then it's a lot easier to just like go to judgment and like worst case scenario. But if you have a little bit of information, then it can help a lot. So again, I don't know when people should tell. And I know I've talked to people who feel like their work has not been nearly as kind and compassionate and understanding as yours was. So I'm there's all kinds of experiences out there. But I do like that point to try to the point, to the degree you can, maybe err on the side of um letting people know or letting people have the chance to show understanding. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. The one thing that I found with some people, it didn't work with everyone, but with some people, if I gave them, a task, so, hey, look, I have a concussion, I'm experiencing some symptoms. And so, the way that's going to impact me and us and our relationship at work for the next, you know, however long is that, I may not be quite as responsive, right? You're used to see me answering emails in 30 minutes and it might be a little longer than that, right? And so I just would ask for your patience and grace as I go through that. And if I use the words patience and grace and I gave them, a typical, example like that, like him, I need you to give me a little grace when I'm not super expedient on answering emails. Okay, no problem, Andy. I got it, right? So if I could give him a specific task like that, it really helped. And you'll know when you think about the person you're telling, if they're a very task-oriented person or um, you'll know whether or not that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Do you feel like um hang on, I had a really good question.
It'll come back.
It will come back. Did people, were there any tasks or things that you had to do in your job that you felt like you couldn't do and that you needed to pull back from entirely? Or was it more of, hey, like give me a little bit of extra time and I'll get it for you? Or were there things that you just like, I can't do this right now. I'm sorry. I don't know if I can think clearly enough or whatever to do it.
You know, it was really a blessing in a lot of ways, right? We'd grown from a startup bank to, decent sized bank. We weren't a big bank by any stretch of the imagination, but a decent sized bank. And I was still the bottleneck on a lot of stuff. We started out with 5 people, and so I was involved in everything, right? And so when I hit my head and they found the brain tumor, I was the bottleneck. I was the one slowing down the growth, and I didn't realize that until I hit my head. And so I sat down with my team and I said, "Hey guys, your leader's wounded, and we're going to have to gather the troops here." And so I had delegated a lot of the things that I used to hold on to. I would hoard them,
Um,
uh, and I delegated them out to my team. And they're all incredibly professional, great people, and they did them better than I would have done them, right? And even without a concussion, right? And so it was amazing. We actually did better with me concussed than before, right? So
That's awesome.
I was able to trust the team and hand off a lot of stuff, and I didn't have to work as many hours, right? I was used to working a really silly amount of hours. I didn't have to do that anymore, and I literally couldn't, which is why I handed things off. But it was a blessing that this, concussion happened.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that perspective. I always am inspired and like love hearing the things that you wouldn't have expected that have come of it, that people frequently say that like it was a blessing. And that's like, I hope people who are listening to this, if you can't see the blessings in it right now, that's okay. But they're there and they're just wait for them. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I appreciate that you
Yeah.
sharing.
It wasn't immediately obvious to me, right? It didn't feel like a blessing at the time. That's
I'm sure. Yes, absolutely. Um, what would you like if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to yourself in the early days of this experience?
I don't know, a couple of things. One is for me, gratitude has been really important. And I tried to practice gratitude before, but this really forced the issue. And we just talked about a perfect example of that, right? That, I was grateful that I had to unload some things to the team and they did better than I would have done. But another example, just so that everybody can think about it, if you're sitting in traffic, and I do not enjoy sitting in traffic, it's really hard to be grateful. But if I stop and pause for a minute, I go, okay, I'm so grateful that I have a car, right? I'm so grateful that I have someplace to go. I have a job I'm going to, or a friend I'm going to go meet, or a game I'm going to go see, or whatever, wherever you're driving to, you've got someplace to go, right? Um, and I'm alive, and the sky is beautiful, the weather's great, or maybe it's raining and we need the rain, or whatever there is to be grateful for. See if you can find five things to be grateful for in the middle of traffic, right? And if you can do that, you're like a Zen master, right? Um, so I work on gratitude a lot. And then, the other thing that's helped me is, I call it my just behave theory. I get really frustrated sometimes that my symptoms are still there, and I have a bad day every once in a while. I can't watch TV. When I go to church, it's a closed eye event for me. I have to close my eyes. When I have Zoom meetings, I have to minimize the screen. There's still some symptoms that are not great, right? I mean, I'd rather they weren't there. And so when I get frustrated with those symptoms, if I can sort of step back for a minute and tell myself, hey, just behave, right? So let's be an adult here, right? Yeah, I'm turning into a child and having an issue with it, right? I have to sort of bring myself back into gratitude and just behave, right? So those are the two things I would try to incorporate. But at the time, you're in the middle of a really tough situation, right? It's hard.
Yeah, it really is. And I think I love both of those, the gratitude and then the just behave thing makes me think of it's like a top-down like cognitive approach of like, hey, like let's put things in perspective. It's okay, like we don't have to do that. But I think it's also totally normal and natural and understandable to have those feelings come up. So I think yeah, if people listening to this are experiencing that, I think it's a like let the feelings happen and recognize that it's of course I'm feeling this way. It makes so much sense. Like it's okay to like validate yourself and normalize it. Like this makes sense that I'm feeling this way. And then try to like if we allow those feelings to process, then we can access that higher thinking brain where it's like, okay, but this isn't how I want to be. Like I want to look at these things or like redirect my attention. And I do think that that's a really important key thing to be able to do that, to redirect our attention. But sometimes we do need to let those emotions process in order to be able to do that. Um, but I love those. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear too. Um, I know that these these experiences are sometimes family experiences, right? It's not just the person who's dealing with it. It impacts everybody. Um, how did this impact the people that you love and that you're close with? And what advice would you have for people who are loving someone who's dealing with this?
Yeah. I'll just back up a second and talk about, when you mentioned emotions and feelings, I learned about how to sort of accept my feelings from one of your newsletters, right? They're fantastic. You and Kaylee put out just an incredible email that's given me, a lot of great thoughts and hope. So I learned about how to deal with, that negative emotion that's sitting on top of, I'm so frustrated I can't do this, and then I get mad at myself for being frustrated, right? So it's this loop, and so it's okay, it's all right, it's totally natural that I'm feeling this way. I just you know bring it back into that sort of adult position. So anyway, thank you for that. All right, so
Yeah.
yeah, loved ones. I have a couple of thoughts here. One's for the patient, right? For the people that were in my situation, and that is, I'm used to being a pretty independent person. I didn't, I think my wife might tell you that before I was too independent, right? Like it was one of my faults that I didn't need or want anything. And so to go from that position to one where I was needing care, especially during and after surgery, was quite a shock to the system for me. And so I was really upset and frustrated and disappointed about being in that situation. And so, what I had to do is sort of pull apart my feelings towards needing care with my feelings towards the caregiver, right? And I wasn't always successful in that. In fact, there were many times I was a jerk, and my wife Lisa was amazing. She was a rock. She was just, thank you. She was amazing. Um, but if I could pull apart my feelings and even discuss that with her, hey, look, I'm so frustrated that I need care, and I so appreciate you, doing that, right? Those are separate things, right? They're separate. And so once I could verbalize that to her, I think it really helped both of us, right? Because she could feel my frustration and my just
Mm.
angst about being in that situation. But I think it helped both of us once I could separate those two things out.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's so important and probably so hard to do, um, to get that separated. But it makes so much sense that it would be, yeah, like that frustration just like pours into all of the things, and then to realize, no, I'm not frustrated at you, I'm frustrated at the situation. So that's good. That's good for any relationship advice for any situation. I think like that's really wise. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And if the caregivers, I would just say, look, the person, the patient, whatever you want to call it, the person in my shoes really doesn't want to be in that situation. Right? I didn't choose to have a concussion or a brain tumor. I don't want to be needing care, right? This is not what I chose. So, a little grace and patience with the patient goes a really long way. Um, and then one of your previous guests talked about this, and I cried when I heard it because it just hit me. But she said, they really want to be believed. You mentioned you can't see a cast with a concussion, right? You can't see the injury. Um, and they just want to be believed, right? When we say we have a headache or we're feeling a little dizzy or that noise really like, I'm
Mm,
cowering in the corner, those are real and true. And so believe them. It's amazing what that'll do for the relationship.
that's so beautiful. Thank you. Yes, yeah, it just makes me, when you said that, and I just thought about as like a mother, I'm like, oh, I should believe my kids when they tell me things. I'm much more prone to be like, ah, you're fine. So I like, thanks for that reminder for parenting as well. This is good. This is good.
Yeah. It's a tricky one, right? I mean, like at work, all the places yeah, but it
Yeah.
definitely applies in the caregiver situation.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Um, and I think this might be, tied into kind of what we were already talking about, but how did you, I know that it can be a jolt to the sense of identity, sense of like self-worth, to have your roles switched on you unexpectedly and in a way you don't want, like to have all of these things that are so much harder for you than like I know a lot of times people feel like they aren't themselves, or they, you can't put in the 60 hours, 80 hours of work that you had been doing, and that was probably brought a lot of, felt like it brought a lot of fulfillment or like sense of pride, like anyway, all of that being changed, how do you figure out how to like love and accept and discover who you are after something like this? Okay, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that process, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that one's really tricky.
It's a big question. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
Whatever you want to say.
it's a great question. It's still, I mean, I'm 4 years post concussion and post discovery of a brain tumor, and I still battle that, every day. But a couple of things that I might put out there. There's a guy by the name of Ram Dass that kind of a sort of a famous figure, has a lot of quotes out there, and he had a stroke, and he had some paralyzation in one of his hands and a lot of changes in what happened after the stroke and before the stroke. And he said something that, I thought, man, that I can use that, right? He said, I had to be like a samurai and divide my life in half. I had to cut it in half. And so before stroke, that was him. That wasn't me. That was someone else. Now it's me, right? And it helped him not to compare himself to a previous version of himself, but it was like someone else, right? And we've all learned to live with comparing ourselves with others. And in some ways, we're going to stack up better. And in some ways, we're going to stack up worse, right? There's always somebody richer, smarter, prettier, whatever than you, right? Always. Um, and so when he separated his life into, before and after, it helped him. And it's helped me too to think about, hey, this is me now, right? That was somebody else, and this is me now.
Mm.
Um, so that's been really helpful. Not easy, but helpful. And the other thing that I try to use, and maybe haven't demonstrated well here, but humor. I try to use humor as much as I can. And one great example of this, when I met the tiebreaker neurosurgeon, that I went to go see, I told you I was going to get a tiebreaker. He handed me his business card, and on the front was his business card. I still have it in my wallet. I can show it to you, but it had his business information on it, and on the back it said brain tumor card. And when I read it the first time, I'm like, why would it say brain tumor card? And then I was trying to think of a word, and I'm like, oh, I get it. I'm going to play the brain tumor card, right? Because sometimes I can't remember a word, right? I'm going to play the brain tumor card, right? So, if I forget your name, Bethany, I'm just going to play the brain tumor card, right? And so, if you want to draw up a concussion card, look, you know what? I used to be really good at remembering names, and I had a concussion, and I'm not so good at remembering names. I'm going to play the concussion card, and you can show them the concussion card, right? Just,
That's
whatever
brilliant.
you can do to make light of it and to, have a little humor in the situation. It just sort of drains all that tension out of it, all that
Mm,
could be really, really difficult.
yeah, that lightens it a lot. I love that actually. And that actually kind of puts back to the whole like, who are we telling? I guess if we're telling everybody, it's like, here, this is it. This is what you
Yeah.
got. Yeah, I like that actually a lot. Um, Thank you for that. Okay, so you've mentioned, I want to hear how you're doing today. You've mentioned a few of the things that are still challenging. And I'm curious if you know, again, some of these things are just like impossible to know, but do you know if these things are the symptoms that you're continuing to have are because of the surgery that you had or lingering concussion? Like, is there a way to know?
Yeah. I don't think there's really a good way to know. My neurosurgeon, who's an incredibly brilliant guy, obviously, has said, yeah, look, I wouldn't have expected the surgery to leave you with some of those symptoms, but it's certainly not out of the question. It could have. So, could it be the concussion? Could it be the long COVID? Could it be the surgery? Yep, any one of those could be the cause, and more than likely, it's probably some combination of those
Mhm.
two or three things. And the fact that I worked way too many hours for 25 years of my life probably didn't help any, right? That probably wasn't the smartest thing. But yeah, so today I still can't watch videos. I just when we watch a movie, I close my eyes, or I do a Sudoku puzzle, or I focus on something else. But I can't. If I watch a video for more than a few minutes, it makes me really I get dizzy and sick, and my head hurts, and it's unpleasant.
Mhm.
Same thing happens in any kind of a busy visual environment, like a church or whatever. It's a closed eye situation for me. And that's tricky sometimes. Like, at work, we were having a big meeting, and they put a video up on the screen for everybody to watch. And I literally can't, I have to pretend I'm taking notes or whatever, right? I can't watch it. So that's usually what I do. I'll pretend I'm taking notes instead of watching the video. I take
Mhm.
notes. So I've gotten really good at audio, right? I process audio really well. Um, so videos are still tough. I still get some fatigue, 8 to 10 hours of work, and I'm toast. And my wife says, "Well, that's what most people get." And I'm like, "I know, but I don't want to be normal, right? Like I really like the other guy, right? That was great." Uh, and about one day out of every 7 or 10 days, I have a pretty tough day where I feel like I'm stuck in molasses, right? I can't process as quickly as I feel like I should be able to. I just feel groggy, and tummy hurts, my head hurts. It's just they're my bad days, right? And so I just adjust what I set my expectations at, right? So I'm not gonna balance the payroll taxes on those days, right? Balancing payroll taxes is really challenging, and I just don't have the ability to do it on those days. So I put that off till the next day. Uh,
Mhm.
Yeah, and I still have a little bit of sound, noise regulation that's a challenge. I probably need to get back to doing the, snapping and figuring out where that's at. And go back to some of those things that I learned at CFX.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Uh, um, I'd love to ask you a little bit more about the bad days that come up. And it sounds like it's on a schedule, not an exact schedule, but like it does happen and it's frequent or it's um regular. Do you how do you like what advice do you have for people who are dealing with a bad day? Like how do you manage that emotionally, mentally? Like I mean, you're already not at full capacity, obviously, because it's a bad day. So like, what do you do, or how do you prep for it, or any thoughts on how to handle that?
Yeah. I've tried to really track it so I can see, I can predict when it might happen, and I can't tie anything together, right? You think it might come after a really long, hard day at work, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, right? You'd think that, if I have a drink or something, it might happen after that. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, right? There's no rhyme or reason to when it's gonna happen. So dealing with it for me has been a challenge. It's, I told you about my just behave theory. I have to use that a lot on my bad days, right? Like it's gonna be okay, right? Like this happens. I know I'm gonna be better tomorrow or the next day. The hardest ones are when I get 2 days in a row that are bad and I
Mm.
battle through 2 days in a row. I get really, really fussy when that happens. And I just have to really slow down and say, okay, it's a great book. I forget the author. He talks about the gap and the gain. And, most
Benjamin
of
Hardy.
what's that?
I think it's Benjamin Hardy. That's the name that comes to my head when you say that, but I could be
Yeah.
wrong. The Gap in the Game.
Yeah, it might be him or it might be Dan Sullivan. I can't remember.
Oh, Dan Sullivan. Oh, yeah. I don't know. We'll look it up. We'll put it in the show notes.
But he talks about the gap and the gain. Most of us focus on we set a goal, right? I want to have whatever it is, a job where I make $100,000 a year or $1 million in my bank account, or, whatever your goal is, right? And that's normal and natural and good and positive. And as we get close to that goal, as you get close to $1 million in the bank, you move the goalposts, right? Like, oh yeah, $1 million is great, but now we need 2 million, right? And so you're always going to move the goalposts. So his point is that it's good and normal and natural to have goals, and that's the gap. But look back and see, right? Like you got $800,000 in your bank account. When you started this thing, you had $20,000 in your bank account. And look at all you've gained, right? Instead of looking at the gap between what you have and where you want to be, because you're always going to move the goalposts. Look at the gain, right? And so I try to, look back and say, okay, 4 years ago, I couldn't look at my screen for more than 10 minutes, right? I had to have my daughter read my emails to me. I was sick most days, right? Like I didn't feel good. I came home and was exhausted most days. I'd spend literally hours in a, quiet, dark room trying to get the spins and the headaches to go away. And, okay, I got a bad day today. All right. Look at the gain, right? So I don't know. I don't know if it works for me sometimes.
I do think that that's really helpful, and appreciate that perspective. I think it's, again, good for anybody to remember that and have that in mind. But especially if you're dealing with a bad day, feels like a setback, like all of these challenges. So thank you for sharing that. Um, what okay, and I know we're getting short on time here, so I don't want to like throw uh throw too much out here, and you've covered a lot of these things. So if this is a redundant question, you can just tell me, we can move on. But I'd love if there's any lessons that you haven't shared yet that you would like to, about what you've learned through this experience, or how you've maintained hope through it. I'd love to have you share your thoughts.
Yeah. Maintaining hope is a challenge, especially when you're not feeling well, right? If it happens frequently, it really is. No one else can see it. It's just you. It's a challenge, right? And it's no different than a woman going through menopause. You can't see a lot of the things that happen to us, right? And so it's truly a challenge to maintain hope through those things. But a lot of the things I've already talked about, I won't reiterate. But one of them that comes to mind is Jim Collins in his book Good to Great. He talked about the Stockdale paradox, and it's basically a prisoner of war who survived many, many years in a prisoner of war camp in Vietnam. And he said he could tell the ones that came in that were going to survive and the ones that weren't, just by the way they talked about it. So the ones that didn't survive came in and said, "Hey, I'm going to be out of here by Christmas." And Christmas would come and go, and they wouldn't be out. And they say, "All right, I'm going to be out of here by Valentine's Day." Valentine's Day would come and go, and eventually they die of a broken heart, right? Um, And so the Stockdale paradox is basically, and I'm sure I'm not doing Jim Collins justice here, but it's basically accept the brutal truth, right? You have to accept where you are and, just sort of say, yep, this is where I'm at right now, and never lose hope and faith that it's going to get better, that things will. improve over time. So that's the Stockdale paradox, right? He eventually got out and survived because he didn't set deadlines. I will be better by, January or whatever. He just said, yeah, I'm gonna get out of here. I don't know when, but I'm getting out, right? I'm walking out of here alive. Uh,
Mm.
that helps me when I think about that.
Thank you. I think too, I just an observation here as we're talking, you've brought up quite a few quotes and books and things that, and I love that you have been filling your mind with these things that will help. Like I think that that really does make a difference, and you can call on it when you've put that information, that inspiration, that uplifting mindset stuff inside of you, then you can call on it when you need it. And I just appreciate that. I think that's a really good example that you're setting for all of us as well.
When you
No.
can't watch TV, Bethany, you have a lot of free time. You can read books, and I do a lot of Audible. I listen on to the books. I have a lot of time to read books.
It's awesome. Well, I think it's great. It's doing good for you, and thank you for sharing it with us. So, that's awesome. I'm just curious too. I know that this was not an easy thing for you to do, to jump on here and share all of this with us. So I appreciate very much that you did it. But I'm curious what made you decide to share.
A couple of things I'll say about that. One is, I just want to say thanks to my wife. She's been an incredible caregiver, and both my daughters were really, really there for me and my mom as we went through the process, right? It wasn't easy. After the surgery, I was a wreck for weeks, right? It was really, I don't recommend brain surgery to anyone, Bethany. It's not much fun. Um, but it's not that different than, what you go through recovering from a concussion, right? So, um, I'll say that it's been 2 years since I had my surgery, and I still have, a lot of symptoms like we talked about. And, at that 2 year anniversary, I got kind of depressed because I was still working really hard to hide it, to not show anyone that I had brain surgery, right? That I had had a concussion. I wanted to, I have a cognitively demanding job. And so I didn't want to, wanted to hide that. And after the 2 years, I kind of went, maybe that's why I'm depressed. I just need to open up and let people know and stop worrying about it. They're gonna decide what they want to decide, and I'm gonna move on, but I'm not gonna carry that burden and hide it. I want to open up about it. So that's kind of why I'm here. I appreciate the opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really, the whole reason I have this podcast is because I feel strongly that stories connect people and give hope. And um, it's so validating for people to hear they're not alone on these journeys, even though everybody's unique, like everybody's journey is their own, but there's a lot of overlap and a lot of understanding and peace that I think can come from hearing that you're not alone. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing it. Anything else? Any final words before we close here? Anything that you want people to know about concussions or your experience?
I think we've covered a whole lot, and I appreciate the opportunity. But I would say it's perfectly okay to seek professional help, whether that's a coach like yourself for concussions, or a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Um, when you're going through these things, it's a lot, right? We all have a lot to deal with. We all have our own adversities and our own issues. But when you're going through a concussion, it's a lot. It adds a significant amount of challenge to your already, challenging life. And so it's perfectly okay to go seek help. And I totally agree with you. Your newsletters have been uplifting and helpful for me, largely because I read it and go, oh, I'm not the only one, right? Like, it's truly helpful for me. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm grateful. It's gratifying to hear that it's useful for people. And I will put ways for people where people can access the newsletters on the show notes as well. So if people want to contact you, if they hear this and like, oh, I just want to get some more of Andy in my life, how can they do that?
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to mention is one of the things that helped me recover is to find a role model, right? And I found a woman that had 12 brain tumors, and all of them had been treated one way or another, surgery or radiation or one way or another. And she's still incredibly cognitively aware and, I mean, really impressive. And so, she's my role model. You don't have to know this person. They could be a famous person, right? You can, if you want to admire Patrick Holmes, right? There's a whole bunch of people that have had a lot of concussions, right? So you can find a famous person or somebody you know, right? And so finding a role model is a great way to move towards recovery. So anyway, feel free to reach out to me and I can try to help you find role models. But my contact info, I'll give you my email. It's Ellison Andy, ELLISONANDY at MSN.com. EllisonAndy@MSN.com.
Perfect. Thank you. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. I think having, friends, mentors, people who've been there, it can be a huge blessing. So thank you for being willing to put that out there as well. And thank you for sharing all of this. I know it's not an easy thing to open up about this, and it wasn't an easy thing. It's still not an easy thing to be going through. So thank you for sharing, even in the midst of the journey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bethany. It's been a pleasure, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the years and look forward to continuing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.